Hey there, full credit class here. This is Mr. Usher. I'm doing another recording for you guys. So, this one is going to be a little unusual for two reasons. One, we had the snow day on Monday, so I had to nix a lesson from there. And two, the three lessons that followed that, which you see here, all kind of followed a very similar format. So what I thought I'd do is I just kind of combine the material from those into a single video. Basically what I did for each of these three classes is I used 1/3 of a video, 1/3 of the same video. That video is about 11 minutes long. I used 1/3 of the video on each of these days to illustrate a different kind of psychotherapy, a different approach to psychotherapy, right? The video was made into an ed puzzle, so each day for the DIN, you essentially had an ed puzzle that we kind of worked on in class. So in theory, should have been pretty straightforward because you had myself plus your fellow classmates to work on it. Of course, if you weren't there, you unfortunately didn't have that advantage, but, try your best, please. Ask me for help if you need it. And then the ticket out the door was kind of reflecting upon the lessons that we learned and kind of compiling things as lessons went on, right? So we had, the psychoanalytic and psychodynamic perspectives initially, which is kind of Freud and his kind of mumbo-jumbo, which is a little weird. But still widely used today for, various reasons. Then we had the Humanistic Existentialist Approach, which is a little bit more personal and you could say like touchy-feely. And I asked you to contrast that with the ticket out the door. So the ticket out the door was basically, compare and contrast, Freud versus humanistic psychology. And then finally, today, on the 31st, we had the Cognitive Behavioral Approach, which combines two different perspectives, the perspective of cognitive therapy and the perspective of behavioral therapy into one kind of cohesive school. This one is very evidence-based and kind of very systematic in the way that it works. And so I kind of had you compare the systematic and really rigorous scientific nature of the cognitive behavioral thing to the other two schools as you took it out the door. So that's basically how that went, right? Anyway, I'm just going to really go over like the basics of what we have with Freud and psychoanalysis here. Also, let me make sure I go over this. So if we go to what we have for each of your classes. So this is my first period class, which you should have this for each of the classes. You basically see the same kind of video here, exact same title, right? But it's broken into three parts, right? So this is part 1 down here. It should be about 3 minutes, 45 seconds. This is part 2. It should be about 2 minutes, 15 seconds. And this is part 3. It should be about 3 minutes, 47 seconds. Those correspond respectively, right? 1-to-1 to, if I can get back to it. They correspond respectively to Freud and psychodynamic perspective here. So that's the first one. Humanistic and existentialist psychotherapy. That's the second one. And cognitive behavioral therapy. That's the third one, right? So 1, 2, 3. And 1, 2, 3. Should be fairly straightforward. Anyway, the idea is each one of these kind of went over a different therapeutic approach and kind of broke down some of the main points there. A few questions for each. I think you guys should be able to handle it. Anyway, let me just go over the basics for each of these so we can understand, and I'll explain a little bit about how we kind of approach that in the class, right? So, with the Freud and the psychodynamic approach, we kind of looked basically at two different parts to this, right? So there's the classic or older, kind of old-fashioned school of therapy, which is known as the psychoanalytic approach. This is literally what Freud and his cohorts used. So Freud and the people that he directly taught use this psychoanalytic approach to psychotherapy. What this basically involves is as the name suggests, analyzing the person as if they were kind of a subject of study, maybe like, something you would put on a slide and put under a microscope, so to speak. You're the scientist, they're the subject of study, and you're kind of analyzing them. This is part of why we had traditionally people in psychoanalysis on that couch, right? The therapist kind of sitting next to them, right? So, imagine I'm kind of sitting here in my chair, and, the couch is like along here, right? So I'm just sitting there. I have, some notes that I'm taking, while I'm looking down at this person. They're looking up at the ceiling. We're not really looking eye to eye for the most part. It's less of a direct, you and I have a conversation type of therapy. in a more like, I'm going to prompt you with things to get you to say stuff. Because the belief is that these prompts will lead you to reveal unconscious desires, unconscious fears, unconscious thoughts and beliefs that you have. Because that's the whole goal of psychoanalytic therapy. And to a lesser extent, psychodynamic therapy, to kind of tease out these unconscious desires and hopefully use these secrets that you get from this to treat a mental illness or some issue that the person is dealing with. So it's kind of impersonal. It's kind of, I'm talking down to you, literally in some cases, right? Because the person is sitting over you, kind of like as you lie on the couch. The idea is it relates to Freud's main concepts of the id, the ego, and the superego. The id is kind of like buried under the surface, right? And that's kind of your primal desires, like, violence, sex, immediate passions. I want this right now. Your ego is kind of the driver of the car. It's kind of making the decisions, piloting things, giving you a sense of like, yes, I am me. I am a person. I'm an individual person. And then the superego is kind of a social phenomenon that's created where you kind of internalize a number of different rules in society. So, whether it's the law, like legal law, that police officers enforce, school rules, the rules your parents enforce, the limitations your boss gives you if you have a job, right? All these rules exist, and it's like basically the superego collecting them and saying like, you should not do this, id, because there's rules against this. So basically, in other words, you have the id, which is like the gas, like go, 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 and you have the superego, which is more of the brakes. And then it's the ego's job, the ego, to actually do the driving and balance the two out, right? Because otherwise we'd be living completely moralistic lives on the one hand, where we didn't feel like we could do anything for fear that we'd break a rule, or we'd basically be living like animals, where we just constantly did whatever we want, whenever we wanted to, and that would be bad as well. Anyway, that's Freud's theory, right? And the id in particular, according to his theory, is buried deep beneath in the subconscious, right? And oftentimes conflicts between, the id, which is buried, and the ego and superego, which are kind of more above the surface. Conflicts between these parts lead to different mental health issues, right? And the idea is, the therapist can kind of tease this out by doing word association, by analyzing your dreams, by, by maybe hypnotism in some rare cases, although Freud even himself moved away from this after a time. So that's the classic psychoanalytic approach, part of this. Nowadays, we do more of a psychodynamic approach, and it's called psychodynamic because, the idea is you have a few more complex elements of your mind, more than just the id, the ego, and the superego, but other kinds of, biases and preconceived notions and physical reactions and all kinds of mental things that are going on that are kind of interacting in a complex way. And so you need the therapist to kind of untangle this complexity for you. And two, because it is a little bit more personal than psychoanalytic. Typically, with a modern psychodynamic approach, it would be me, the therapist, still writing some stuff down, but looking you in the eye, talking to you, right? It would feel a little bit more like a conversation, even though fundamentally, philosophically, it's not really a conversation. It's them, still kind of examining you to some extent, maybe not analyzing you quite like the classic Freudian would do. Anyway, that's the first approach here. The second approach is the humanistic existentialist approach. Humanistic refers to a broad set of philosophies that basically champions like human drives, human initiatives, the value of human beings as thinking, rational creatures, right? Existentialist refers to a set of philosophy that deals with basically our existence and its inherent absurdity. So basically our existence here not necessarily making any inherent sense because we maybe are aware of the world around us, but we don't inherently understand what the world is and why the world works the way it does. So that feels kind of absurd, and that can create a lot of anxiety and maybe even depression. So the main thing behind the humanistic existentialist approach is that it is more of a conversation, right? It's not necessarily like I'm the expert and I'm talking down to you. It's really you and I are having a conversation. It's more casual. It's more comfortable. And the idea is that I am trying to empower you. I'm trying to validate you, make you feel like a good, valid, full person, so that you can actually solve your own problems, right? It's kind of a help me help you type of therapy, right? The whole goal, if the humanist or existentialist therapist is doing their job right, is for the patient to almost feel like, the therapist didn't really do much of anything for them at all, right? That they basically figured out their own issues, right? You're trying to lead them to the answers within themselves. And we do this in a couple ways. Part of it is what's called unconditional positive regard. When somebody says something, even if it's something that we internally might judge as being negative or problematic, as a therapist, we don't say that. We just regard it positively and try to give a positive, warm feeling to the person. There's also active listening, right? So, I'm talking about stuff right now and explaining what humanistic existentialist psychotherapy is. And if you were actively listening to me, you would say, okay, Mr. Usher, I hear that you're trying to explain what these therapeutic approaches are because they're very important and you want us to learn about them. That's essentially active listening. It's kind of making it explicitly clear to the person you're listening to that you heard what they said and that you internalize the meaning of it, right? Anyway, once you kind of have that, you want to try to dig deeper into like the fundamental issues that are kind of, either giving the person meaning or are barriers to them finding meaning. And this is especially important from like an existentialist perspective, because existentialists worry about things like fundamental anxiety, death, freedom of choice, these deep philosophic things that maybe can indirectly cause more psychological issues. Basically that's what that is. Whereas with the first approach here, with the psychoanalytic, psychodynamic thing, we kind of had a lying on the couch thing where I kind of brought in a pillow and I asked some students to like lie on a couple of desks and kind of simulate what that was like. With the humanistic approach, I had a couple of folding chairs. We kind of sat, loosey-goosey, chill out kind of style. And I would just like talking to you, we're rapping about stuff. Because that is kind of supposed to be more of what the feel of that therapy is like. It really is supposed to feel like a kind of a friendly conversation where you can really trust and confide in that humanistic therapist. Anyway, that brings us to the third approach here, cognitive behavioral therapy. The Ed puzzle talks a little bit about cognitive therapy, which is about kind of conditioning, using repeated stimuli to trigger a behavior, right? If I, snap my fingers and then I say, when I snap my fingers, I want you to jump and grab a bar. And then if you do jump and grab the bar, I'll give you a piece of candy. If I do that over and over and over and over, I might have conditioned you such that even if there's no candy or I didn't prompt you at all, I could just snap my fingers and you would jump and grab the bar, right? Because you've associated the stimuli, the sound of me snapping, with an action or a behavior. And that's what cognitive therapists try to do, behavioral therapists try to do, to condition new behaviors in you because they think the behavior is the root of the issue. Cognitive therapy is more concerned with your thoughts, negative thinking that is kind of maladaptive or is incorrect or is leading to illogical conclusions. So they try to get you to break down your thinking into kind of a diagram, thoughts here, feelings here, behaviors, how they're all connected. And the idea is, you want to be able to see where there are errors in how these thoughts, feelings, and behaviors link together. There's also a triangle here where you basically have the top thoughts, you have feelings over here, and you have behaviors over here, right? And the thoughts are linked to situations. A situation is objective, it's neutral, it's just what happened. It isn't good or bad, it just is. But that leads to thoughts. The thoughts can lead to feelings or behaviors. All these things are connected, and the idea is for the cognitive behavioral therapist, they want to A, train you to perform new behaviors, and B, encourage you to reconsider different thinking patterns you have, so that the two of those together can kind of engender better feelings, better thinking, and better behavior, right? That's basically that. So I diagrammed some stuff for students to kind of illustrate that before I kind of let them out. And that's basically all three of them, right? I tried to do that as quickly, but also as efficiently as I can. Hopefully it made sense to you guys. If not, please, please, please come see me. Otherwise, I will see you later, and have a good one.